Hello and welcome. I am Sri Durga and today you are watching DME Prime Hours with Legal Sharks, where we have inspiring conversations with leading legal minds. Join us as we explore the legal domain and the developments that continue to shape our legal landscape. Today, we are hosting the very first episode of our flagship series, DME Prime Hours with Legal Sharks, and we are very honored to have with us Ms. Suruchi Kumar, partner, Shardur Amarchand Mangaldas & Co., which is one of the prestigious leading law firms in India. With her extensive experience in labor and employment sector, she has been instrumental in advising various organizations in building a equitable and inclusive workplaces in India. Welcome Suruchi to the show. Today Suruchi is in a conversation with us on the evolution of laws on building equitable and inclusive workplaces in India. Okay, Suruchi, we are so happy to have you with us on the our flagship series show today. And it is a very important topic which is in discussion today. To begin with the question, my first question is, as the topic, the diversity and inclusion. This is a very crucial topic in Indian history, Indian political and Indian political and societal history, and somehow they complement each other. The laws on diversity and inclusion in Indian workplaces reflect, somehow our country's constitutional ideals, okay, of social justice and equality. To begin with, my first question is, could you briefly share us the concept of diversity and inclusion, and how it has evolved in Indian workplaces, also considering the fact that employment was something which was a right or a facility which was available to a very marginal section of the Indian society. So how the concept of diversity and inclusion has developed over the times in India. Can you share an insight about that?
No, absolutely, Durga, and this is a great question because this takes us back to the Constitution of India and tells us that diversity and inclusion is not just a textbook thing, but it is actually something which has to be done in society for what you said, equitable opportunities for various reasons, not just employment. Since I'm a labor lawyer, I deal with diversity and inclusion at the workplace, so I have a perspective on that and how it has evolved, and I like to share that today. So Constitution of India, as we all know, Article 14, equality before law and equal protection under laws. Article 15, prohibition of discrimination. Article 19, right to freedom of speech, expression, practice, trade and business, etc. Right. There are a lot of, and 21, right to life with dignity, right to life properly, right. Which includes right to life with dignity. So that was the foundational base of everything that has evolved and then come about in our country, and was incorporated by various means, was incorporated by laws, was incorporated by guidelines, was incorporated by judicial interpretation, and how it evolved was something that we all also know. Say for instance, let's take the example of inclusion of women in the workplaces, which has always been an issue. So as you said, historically there has been a little bias towards upper caste.
Right.
There has been a little bias towards men being
Right.
hired.
Right.
There have been little bias towards women being think of maybe perhaps for a job which is not as technical, or which is not as strenuous,
Right.
because they believe that women will not be able
Right.
to take that pressure. And there has been somewhere a little outcast system which had developed over a period of time. To rectify that, it has taken a long time, still is being rectified, but there have been affirmative actions which have been taken place. If I were to take the example of women, now women also, they are coming into the labor force. I see a lot of women over here in the senior,
Yes.
fraternity as well. Like mostly I see women level, women professors over here, a lot of women students over here. So it's about the fact that how women are given a safe space, are allowed to work with dignity, are allowed to work with protection. So that got recognized by the Supreme Court in Vishakha guidelines, in Vishakha
Right.
versus State of
Right.
Rajasthan, which is quite an old judgment, and it spoke about how if we are going to let women come on an equitable platform and allow them to participate in the society, in the workplace, and contribute to the economy of the country, we have to make sure that it's a safe space to work. And that is how Vishakha guidelines came about. And the Vishakha guidelines told that there has to be a proactive effort by the employer to make sure that the space is safe. There has to be a proactive effort by the employer to
right.
make sure that if a complaint comes about, it is redressed in a timely fashion by a properly constituted committee.
Right.
And that got evolved into the act that we know today as the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prohibition,
Right.
Prevention, Redressal Act of 2013.
Right.
It came about very late, and it came about very unfortunately due to the Nirbhaya incident, but it did come about. And it also led to parallel updates to the criminal laws, you know, where the earlier penal code, today the BNS, was made to include sexual harassment in its
Right.
purview. The field of sexual offences against the women, you know, was expanded. So a lot of changes came about by that. So the evolution for women, I believe, started from there. The evolution of inclusive, so I always feel that inclusion leads to diversity.
Diversity.
It's not diversity which leads to inclusion. It's
Right.
like if I imbibe an inclusive practice at the workplace, or if I imbibe an inclusive practice at the entity which is over here also, diversity will follow.
Right.
If I don't have an inclusive practice, or if I feel that, okay, I don't need women, or I don't need persons with disabilities, what's the point of the diversity being there also? The inclusion has to happen before, and then the diversity, you know, will appear. So another, you know, in diversity and inclusion aspect is the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. You know, we had a Persons with Disabilities Act in 1995, but it was again, you know, not a law which included a lot of diversities, you know, disabilities, such as even neurodivergent,
Right.
you know, people. And the new law which came about in 2016, Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, that actually brought about a lot of, you know, change, and included the ambit of almost 21 disabilities. And it also made sure and made it
Yes.
very mandatory for, you know, giving reasonable accommodation.
Right.
Ramp ways
Right.
is a reasonable accommodation for a person who has minimal vision
Right.
but is able to work,
Hmm.
and giving them support for, you know, being able to work is reasonable accommodation. And you know, for well lit passages, well lit hallways,
Right.
you know, well lit parking lots, assistance to scribe,
Right.
these are all minimal requirements. These are bare minimum,
Right.
and you know, every organization can do those reasonable
Right.
accommodations.
Right.
So that is how that evolved. And then we come to the Transgender Persons Rights Act, which came from the very famous Nalsa judgment,
Nalsa.
which was before the Supreme Court of India sometime in 2014. And there we understood that, you know, there is a section of society which is still being overlooked and categorized as some beggars.
Right.
That's it. We used to think of hijras as beggars or kinnars as beggars. But they're not just beggars. They are a functioning part of society, and they need the access to public employment. They need access to private employment. They need the access to public spaces. And that's how the, you know, the recognition of transgender persons came about.
Right.
That led to the law coming in of Transgender Persons Rights, you know, Protection of Rights Act of 2019 and the rules of 2020. The evolution has been slow. It has been coming from the Constitution. It has been coming from the conventions, the UN
Right.
conventions,
Right.
the UN and, you know, the Human Rights Declaration, the CEDAW Convention, the Convention of Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. But it has been there, you know. So, I mean, we can see, like, as a lawyer sitting back and advising, I can see the trend that how people and, you know, even the judicial activism out there in the courts, I can see that happening, that it's not just a hollow word. it's actually being imbibed, it's actually being enforced, it's actually being asked now.
Right.
People are asking for their rights.
Right.
And people are aware of their rights. That's how I'm seeing it being evolved.
Right. So very insightful because especially when you said it's inclusion which creates diversity, because we always think about India as a diverse country, so we should include everyone. Very interesting perspective. And the thing is that you already discussed about women, people who are belonging to LGBTQ communities and disabilities, and among others. So my another question is that do you think there is a development of right-based approach towards these things, rather than considering these people as someone who is a vulnerable group requiring sympathy or something like that? So this creation of a right-based approach, has it actually changed the situations regarding inclusion of such kind of vulnerable and marginal groups in workplaces? Do you see there is a change, the emerging laws, that they actually do you see any difference in the perspective of employers and other management at the workplaces?
It's slow, but it's there. It's about the change in mindset. It's not just about the law, it's also about the change in mindset. And India is a diverse and a huge country, and it is taking its own time because we have tier 1 cities, tier 2 cities, tier 3 cities, and everybody has their own mindsets and their own societal norms is what I will call it. And it's taking some time, but I can see it happening. So earlier it used to be that they are marginalized or vulnerable.
Right.
Now it is that untapped portion of society which has the capability but is not being incorporated. So now it has become like, I know that there is a person with disability, and in fact we've had when I was working in the earlier Amarchand CAM, and now I'm working in SAM, and I've had experiences where we've had lawyers who have had visual impairment but have worked fabulously.
Right.
In fact, I'll give you an example of Mr. Amar Jain, who's a visually impaired lawyer and now into activism, and he is coming forth and filing proactively cases and calling out employers for not having inclusivity, accessibility. And he's telling people to be more inclusive.
Right.
He's telling people to be more accessible. He's telling platforms to be more accessible. So he is the one who, and people like him are the ones who I feel are using the rights-based approach to slowly thaw the mindset of people to who feel that this is still a marginalized society.
Right.
He and people like him are showing the world that we are perfectly fine. We may have an impairment, but we are perfectly fine to work. We just need a bit help from you.
Right.
And that is what I'm asking.
Yes.
For example, like Amar and his another co-petitioner, they recently, and it was quite a good judgment, they filed a case before the Supreme Court of India for increasing digital accessibility. So, I mean, you feel that, oh, I can use Uber, I can use my mobile banking app with ease. Everybody should be able to.
Right.
That's my mindset, which also needed to be changed. With his petition and reading his judgment, I realized that there is a thing called, KYC, which requires you to blink.
Right. Yes.
And people with visual impairment, are they able to blink? Or people with, and the other co-petitioner was actually an acid attack victim. So was she able to blink? No, because of the acid attack, her facial disfigurement didn't allow her to blink.
Right.
This is one minor hiccup that she had from accessing a mobile banking app or completing a KYC norm.
Right.
And she was asking for, don't make it blinking.
Right.
Like, change your KYC norms.
Right.
That judgment has led to RBI, SEBI, all the financial sectors in overhauling their process of KYC norms.
Right.
So can you imagine, like, from a person, if they thought that they were just vulnerable and did not have any right, they could have just sat back. But they said that, no, I'm not vulnerable. I just have a little impairment and I need assistance from society to allow me to function with my impairment.
Yes, yes.
So it's my right to function. It's
Right.
my right to have the KYC done.
Right.
It's my right to have access to the mobile banking app. It's my right to have a banking system which is accessible to me. So the rights-based approach has come in. It's just a change of mindset which will be required, including us. I mean, all of us are, I feel, so I used to work with this organization before joining SAM called Ungender. And and even there, all of us used to huddle up and, get back into our own selves and ungender and,
Yes.
and take off our own our unconscious biases.
Yes.
A lot of us feel that it's very normal for us to behave like this, and we don't put ourselves in the shoes of the others and then think that, okay, what could be the issue for them. We have to understand their issue, change our own mindset, and then also evolve, and help with other people's mindset. So that rights-based approach is actually good,
Yes, yes.
teaches us as well.
Fascinating. It all comes to Article 21, right to live with dignity for
Exactly.
everyone. And it is like when you were talking about the particular petitioner who filed, for the KYC changes, I was remembering the law that abolished plastic straws in USA.
Yeah.
There was a whole movement against plastic straws abolishing among the disability people, because there were people with certain disabilities who required the help of plastic straws, who are unable to drink from a cup like we drink here today.
Yeah.
So it is really fascinating, and as we all know, we have heard when you talk about disability rights, we have to involve them in policy making.
Yes.
So this is one of the examples. I think when they get involved, we can provide them the actual rights that they actually require. Yes, interesting. So another question that I want to ask is regarding, like, we spoke about various laws. You spoke about Disability Act and NALSA and other kind of judgments, changes in the criminal laws, including BNS and everything. So what do you think about the actual, whether these laws have been practically relevant? I'm speaking particularly with reference to, workplaces.
Yeah.
Like, I just give me a second. You were talking about POSH.
Yeah.
POSH is one of the laws which I feel has been implemented in almost private and public institutions. But from your experience as a practical, you have a practical exposure as a lawyer. So what do you think, whether there is a actual realization of these rights at the workplaces, whether public or private? Can you give us an insight about that?
That's a great question.
Yes.
I'll probably rat out a few things that we see in the industry. So even as an advisor, and we do a lot of due diligences, and the future law students over here will do a lot of due diligence or may have done in their internships. We see the compliances in a due diligence, right? And I'm not even going into the fact that what I advise. I'm just going into the fact that what I observe. And in the due diligences, we observe at least 8 out of the 10 companies that we due diligence are not compliant.
Okay,
It's
okay.
sad.
This you're talking about the private or public sector? Private sector.
Private sector, in fact. So at least 8 out of the 10 companies that we diligence are not compliant. In fact, I always give this example. One of the companies that I was diligencing now, POSH Act, is very peculiar in the way the internal committee is formed. It says that the topmost officer of the internal committee is a woman.
Right.
In that company, and it's a huge company, okay, and it has offices and stores all across India. The presiding officer was a man. So I like, you are a big company. How are you sitting? And
so
the owner,
statutory non-compliance presiding officer is a man. Right.
And the owner of the company.
Okay.
And then we were having an all-party call on the diligence findings, and I told him that, sir, you are, you as per the law, you are not required to even sit over there. Forget being the presiding officer. You are the CEO of the company,
right.
you are the owner of the company. You are the employer under the POSH Act. You are required to be far away from these proceedings. You're not required to sit over there. He's like, oh, but my wife is in HR. I'm like, okay, if your wife is in HR, that should have been the first case that you should have discussed. Yeah, we don't discuss work at home. I'm like, we should have at least for that. So you see the example of a huge company having multiple offices, multiple stores across India, still having presiding officer as a man. It made me understand that the act is there. It's still going to take us time for it to. In fact, that's what the Supreme Court realized in Aureliano Fernandez case versus State of Goa. If everybody would have read the recent judgment of Aureliano, which has led to a widespread vigilance. You know, now there are notifications coming from each state. In the last notification I read was State of Gujarat, which said that the district officer will go from company to company and do a survey, or at least have people doing a survey, like an inspection, of how many people are complying with the POSH Act.
Right.
So, people are non-compliant. The Supreme Court, after 10 years of the POSH Act also being in effect in 2023, realized we are sitting in 2025, still non-compliance is half there.
Okay.
You know, still today the intimations are coming from the government. The She-Box portal is there, which has made it mandatory for organizations to register themselves. The vigilance is high, but the implementation is still, like getting there.
Right.
So, in all these measures which companies think that are forced, we have to register our IC with a few states. I say it's good. At least you're making your IC. At least you're coming to people like me to ask, what's an IC? How do I form an IC? What's the composition of an IC?
Right.
I'm happy you're doing that, but as long as there is implementation. I remember, 2013, right? The act came about.
Right.
Before that, Vishakha held the space. Vishakha guidelines also people used to not comply with. Like they were hardly compliant. They said that, oh, it's guidelines. We don't need to comply. The law came about, oh, now what do? We don't have women. You saw how the law identified the lack of women in participation in the workforce. We don't have women in the top.
We don't
So
have
how do
women
we
in
have
the
a
parliament
presiding-
also.
Yeah, we don't have women.
Yes.
Right? So the law understood. Few years back, the Companies Act, if you see now, this used to happen long back in panchayats.
Yes.
There used to be always one punch who used to be a woman.
Women.
But the companies in their board of directors have now started having a compulsory women director. Now.
No.
And it's slow. The women participation is slow, but it's there. So when practically we look at due diligences, we see a lot of non-compliance, but we get an opportunity to advise them, or at least advise the client. So if it's an acquisition happening of a client taking over a target company who we have due diligence, we tell the client that their IC is not there, or this policy is not there, and then at least by that effort we make sure that the client incorporates that, and before it takes over the company, it makes sure that the target does it, so that it doesn't have that risk also. So we have to make it like a risk. POSH Act says that you're going to be fined 50,000, and you're going to be fined double after that. Your business license will get cancelled. So as lawyers, we also need to scare them to say that business license will get cancelled. You will not be able to run your business. So then people get realized that how important these laws are. I will not be able to complete my business if I don't comply with the POSH Act. So in due diligences, that is how we make sure that the employers are complying with it. And when it comes to advisory, that's very, like their prerogative to come to us, to a lawyer, and they say that, okay, I'm either incorporated since a while, but I have never complied with POSH Act, so now tell me what to do.
Okay.
Or I'm just incorporating the company and I want to comply with the POSH Act, and tell me what to do. I can see that also happening a lot. So
Right.
it's not that in due diligence, of course, because due diligence we dig things. In advisory, at least people come to us with honesty and say that, okay, I have not been compliant and now tell us what to do.
Right.
But yeah, the non-compliance is quite high, quite high. Now there are other policies also, like, a Transgender Persons Act has a policy, equal opportunity policy. Non-compliant. Companies are non-compliant. I feel, if I can just be a bit candid over here, that's a part of the lawmaker's mistake. There is no penalty for not doing that.
Not compliant.
If only the law had a penalty, we could have forced it.
Yes, this whole realm of labor and employment law is highly outdated when it comes to penalties and the new code that has not even been implemented. So yes, yes.
Yeah, but no, you know, in fact, the other day we had a chat. In fact, Vicky had organized a session with Mr. Mansukh Mandavia, the Labour Minister, and he had said that we want this to come about soon.
Really?
So yeah, so we all are hoping also that it will come about soon.
Because it's been 5 years.
Yeah, it's been 5 years, but we are all hoping that it will come about soon. And then, yeah, there's going to be a lot of shift in the penalties. There's going to be a lot of compounding of offences. There's going to be a lot of decriminalization. There's going to be a lot of study.
Okay, okay. So, Suruchi, very interesting. Somehow we are all aware about, how Indian society perceives to marginalized groups, especially women, transgenders and all. So I wanted to ask you about this something called minimalistic approach. Do you think when you were sharing your experiences, at workplaces towards women, transgenders, do you think what they follow is some kind of a minimalistic approach? Because you were taking the example of panchayat. Yeah, every panchayat there is a female representation required, but they are more like a binamis. So they don't actually rule. They are the panchayat is actually ruled by their husbands. Or some other male person. So what is your perspective on this minimalistic approach towards implementing inclusivity of the marginalized groups?
It's divided. There are some companies which do very high and they don't call it as a token approach, minimalistic or a tokenism. They're genuinely invested into the efforts. Some companies are still tokenism. In fact, like under the Companies Act, you are if you have a turnover of about 4-5 crores, something like that, you have to do CSR initiatives. A lot of companies do this as a CSR initiative. So again, tokenism, right? They will invest, they will fund an NGO which is for the rights of marginalized, or for diversity or inclusion, or they will just make some employee benefit programs out of that fund. A lot of companies are, if I will give the example of few of the famous ones, Godrej, Axis Bank, Future Generali and all. These are companies who are actually not doing it as tokenism.
Okay.
They are doing it as a proper effort to ensure that they are being inclusive in their practices and increasing the diversity of their companies, because increasing diversity of their companies means getting more talent, means getting more productivity, means getting more money.
Yes, yes.
As simple as that. I mean, business is a business at the end of the day.
There is some sort of marketing also involved in this.
Marketing is on. But they understand that. It's a smart way of doing business, but it's also making sure that, Godrej has been, I think, the pioneers of, diversity and inclusion initiatives. They had a pride group way back. Before pride groups even became the trend, and these employee resource groups became a trend. In fact, I think in 2014, before Navtej Singh Johar, 4 years before Navtej Singh Johar, I was doing a research because one of our clients wanted to set up a pride group, set up an employee resource group for transgender persons and LGBTQ community. And they were scared because they were like, Suresh Kumar Kaushal had just come in to 2013 and they were worried that if they are going to be falling foul of Suresh Kumar Kaushal, which held the space at that point of time before Navtej Singh Johar went into review and turned the law again. So they were worried that, oh, are we going to be... In fact, I got in touch with, this NAS Foundation. I got in touch with NAS Foundation. And I got in touch with all these groups and Godrej and other companies which had been running their pride groups even before that.
Right.
They were all like, listen, now Suresh Kumar Kaushal is talking about the fact that 377 stays. 377 is unnatural offence.
Yes.
If I am in a relationship with someone and I'm just wanting support, or if I'm just that community, if I'm just that identity, or if I'm just that sexual orientation, if I'm wanting support, that's not an offence. So at that point of time only Godrej understood this concept and long back, and then they used to give support to people without making it fall foul of the law to people who needed that mental support, that emotional support, if they were belonging from the LGBTQI plus
Right.
community. And then they used to do that. So it's divided. There are companies who call it tokenism. There are companies who will just wave the flag when it's Pride Month.
Huh.
There are companies who will just do all these activities when it is required, maybe for a survey which is happening by any of the foreign clients, or it's an investor feedback that they need to give. But there are companies who genuinely believe in the cause and are pioneering, and are the ones which are telling us. Our own firm has a diversity collective, like we call it the SAM Diversity Collective, since long time.
Okay.
Yeah, we believe in the fact that everybody has the right to be heard.
Okay.
We believe in the fact that everybody has the right to be represented. We believe that we are a group, and we proudly say that we are one place where 50%, 51% of the firm is women.
Okay.
51. We are actually equitable that way.
Okay.
We like, if women, we have reached that target. We have to reach the target of also other, marginalized communities like transgender persons. It's up to them to come forward and tell us we are transgender. It's up to them to come forward and tell us they have a sexual orientation which could be gay or lesbian. Up to them.
It's up to them.
But at least it's that the safe space is there for them to
Okay,
come forward. So we have created that. SAM is one of those proud people to create. We've been awarded also for our diversity and inclusion initiative. So there is a divide. Some people do, some people don't. But at least the ones who are doing are we're showing the ones who don't that, listen, we are there. You also do something about it.
Very good. It's a very good practice that other institutions and organizations can also follow, because most of the time there is some closeted where they are unable to show their real
and that all
identity.
comes from the fact that there is no safe space.
Right.
They feel that they will be judged. They feel that they will be looked differently upon if they come forward. And that is what companies need to make sure, or organizations need to make sure, that the space is safe. It's there's something called psychological safety, and in fact we help clients to do a survey on psychological safety also. So a lot of clients come to us and labor rights are human rights, diversity inclusion rights are human rights, psychological safety is also a human right. So we help clients to answer questions on psychological safety, which is now a main thing. Psychological safety is making sure that even as a professor, the student can approach you with a question. Psychological safety is even as a lawyer or a partner in the firm, the intern can approach me for a question. Psychological safety is also if I am a person from having a different gender identity or a sexual orientation, I can come to you and still tell you about it. And I won't be looked differently. So psychological safety is now a must in all organizations, which I think clients are also understanding, and they are quite looking into it, because a psychologically safe person is a more productive person at work again. If we also look at it from, is a more attentive person at the workplace or at the organization, is a more contributory person at the organization.
Thank you very much, Suruchi, for bringing up this point. Why I'm telling you this, because such kind of conversations actually build some kind of exposure amongst the people, whether they are students or otherwise, to really think in the other way, to provide a space to reveal or to protect the identity of a individual or group of individuals. So that's very interesting. Okay, coming to the last question of this segment, after which we can discuss something about your career in leading law firms. I just wanted to ask you, what are the challenges we have discussed, but some practical measures that you feel that can bring inclusivity in workplaces in India, like if something that organizations can follow, or maybe something the lawmakers can make. What would be those measures, if you have some perspective on that?
I think I have more measures for lawmakers.
Okay.
Because once the lawmakers do their little changes to the law, which makes it more mandatory, I think the people will follow it. Because we are a country, I think we want to be ordered, perhaps. So many of us don't do it on our own. unless it is required or unless it is statutorily mandated. If the lawmakers, which they're trying to do something around the criminalization, do something around the penalties, do something around the mandatory requirements. Like say for instance, let's take the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act. The equal opportunity policy, which is the main thing which companies need to incorporate, is not mandatory. I mean, it's there, but it doesn't have a penalty. People think it's not mandatory, so they don't do it. There are also infrastructural requirements over there, gender neutral washrooms.
Right.
Asking the person if they require any other, any other requirements for, making sure that the space is safe for them. Do they have that? So they have, kept it very vague and open-ended. In fact, I mean, if you would have seen the news, this law had a lot of pushback from the community itself because they were not consulted when the act came about.
Right.
They were like, you've not even thought of us. You've just made it. It's something. One lady professor I was talking to, she said it's a toothless tiger. It looks very scary, but it has no teeth. So
I think there was a whole criticism on Nalsa judgment also.
Exactly. So this, this felt in fact like a tokenism from the government. This felt as if they wanted to bring it about, but they didn't think this through.
Right.
And only when the rules came about, and because the protests had already happened on the law, on the act, the rules got public consultation where we all gave a lot of feedback to them. But the rules are not the place where you put penalties. So penalties could still not be put in, and the act came without the penalties. And the rules are where the equal opportunity policy was put, but it did not have any correlation to violation. The violation only relates to denying public access or denying anything, like right to public spaces. But it did not have any correlation to the fact that what if I don't do it in my organization, in my private organization. So I think there the lawmakers have an opportunity to probably rectify. We don't have a holistic anti-discrimination law. We don't have it. Shashi Tharoor had tabled it in the parliament long time back, 2016 perhaps. And again it tried getting tabled, I think in 2021 if I'm not mistaken. There is no holistic anti-discrimination law in India, and the multiplicity of laws in India don't make it easy for a person to comply with also. So if I were to have a holistic anti-discrimination law, which would include prohibition of discrimination, imbibe the constitutional principles of Article 15 and make it into a law which would include all the provisions of prohibition on all grounds, including at the workplaces, make workplace one segment of it, and prohibition of discrimination at that workplace, it's a segment. Wouldn't it be so easy? It'll be so much easier to implement, and it'll be like a law where you have made sure there is no discrimination at the workplace. There are proactive efforts made for prohibition of discrimination against women, prohibition of discrimination against person with a different identity of gender, prohibition of discrimination against person with sexual orientation, caste, creed, sex, religion, anything. Imbibe the constitutional principles and make a one-stop law. And that's it. That's all that is required maybe at the end of the day. So if that happens, work gets more for us, and we make sure that the companies are compliant. Because today we tell people that do equal opportunity policy under the Transgender Persons Act, they're like, Suruchi, there's no penalty for me. I'm like, but it is a reputational risk. Tomorrow you will get foreign funding, they will want to know. So, theek hai, maybe we'll think about it at that point of time. It comes the answer. But now if there's going to be an anti-discrimination law, something which is more, having more teeth to bite on, I think that'll help more.
Interesting. It is actually a tiger with no tooth when there is no penalty. Thank you so much. That was very insightful, and various practical perspectives on the topic of diversity and inclusion. Now moving on to the next segment, that is regarding developing a career in the law firms. Especially you are at one of the top law firms, that is Shardul Amarchand. Well, the first question that I want to ask you is like, for an aspiring lawyer, that is the law students, what skills or what key steps they should recommend, well, like, you recommend for building up a strong CV and getting a good career in tier 1, tier 2 law firms?
See, I think everybody needs to intern everywhere possible. It's not necessary you have to fix a field where you want to intern or fix a type of a place you want to intern. It's not necessary to intern always only at a tier 1 law firm. It's necessary to intern at an NGO. It's necessary to intern at a chamber. It's necessary to intern with a trial lawyer. It's necessary to intern with a senior advocate. It's necessary to intern with a law firm. Get your experience everywhere, because each place will teach you something different. Each place will teach you how tough law is once you step out of the university. Each place will teach you what is drafting. Okay, every place will have a very different way of drafting. Each place will teach you very different way of analyzing things. From which perspective? If you are analyzing things from a trial perspective, what is cross examination and how do you do cross examination, and what kind of questions will you ask? If you are analyzing things from a senior advocate's or a senior lawyer's chamber perspective, how do you argue the law, not the facts, the law in front of the judges? So it will treat you that. When you go to a corporate law firm, whether it's a tier 1, whether it's a tier 2, whether it's a tier 3 law firm, whether it's a boutique law firm, doesn't matter. It will teach you skills like due diligence. It will teach you skills like compliance audits. It will teach you skills like drafting a contract. Basic fundamental skills. Interns may not get a lot, and it's okay, because interns initially might just shadow lawyers if they are going to a trial lawyer's chamber or a senior lawyer's chamber. Interns are mostly going to be just doing researches, but those are the steps, those are the foundation steps. So we cannot be like running towards the fact that we'll get everything to do in the first day. You have to build your steps, you have to build your acumen, and you have to be patient with yourself, because law is not a field where you get success like this. Law makes you slog hard, law makes you work hard. It's not like I graduated college and I reached SAM. It's not that, right? I mean, you and I have been in the same college. I went for my LLM. I came back from my LLM. I joined Vesh Associates Advocates. Boutique law firm, tax mostly, but I joined their corporate department. Not much work. Okay, then I went to another place. Then I went to another place. Then I went to that Amarchand, which was undivided, where I was again an associate. Then I went to another place. Then I came back here, and then I came to SAM, and I have worked on SAM to where I am today. So it's a long process, but every step teaches you drafting, research, have fundamentals. You have to be understanding how to do that in every space. Analytical skills is built over time, and it is the most important as a lawyer. Once you graduate, you're not a law graduate, you're a lawyer. So from the day one, everybody should have at least understood how is the basic research. Everybody should have at least understood the basic fundamental of drafting a contract. Everybody should have at least understood the basic fundamental of analyzing a question of law. How do you advise? If somebody will come and ask you, how do I do a 498A case in under the Negotiable Instruments Act, how would you do it? How would I do a case under the labor law? How would I do something under, what is the basic fundamental of working hours under the labor law? These are all research things which will then help you. So internships are very important, and good internships or mediocre internships, there's no difference. Internships are internships. It's not necessary that only Amarchand internships make an impact. No. Amarchand internships may make an impact if you do it in their final year, but otherwise every under internship has to make an impact. So internships is important. Legal research, do legal articles, article writing. If you do legal article writing, you develop a thought process. You develop how to enunciate. You develop how to articulate your thoughts, and you develop what is your position on a specific field or a specific topic of law. You do articles. You try to, read up as much as possible on the latest updates of the laws. The latest updates of the laws, like if I am just throwing around judgments, is something because I read it all. It's important, and that is how people talk. That is how people will, talk in the fraternity. As soon as you get out there, people are just going to be talking about this judge and that judgment. Krishna Iyer in ABC judgment. So, you know, everybody is going to be talking like that. You have to read your judgments. And this is some skill that I learned, which was the most important skill of my life from one of the senior advocates that I was working with. And he said that, Suruchi, you're as good as the law you know. You're as good as the facts you know. Read the facts, read the law, apply the fact, apply the law to the facts. That's lawyer's job. So they were like, you know, you have to be well versed in reading. You have to be well versed in your law. Whenever the case comes, you will have to see it. So these are basic fundamental skills of a lawyer which we learn only step by step. You still keep on learning. And that's the field of law. You still keep on learning. Today we'll learn. Tomorrow the labor codes will come in. I'll be still a student. I'll be back to studying the labor law, labor codes and trying to implement it with the knowledge that I have. So it's like an endless field of study, but that is what we need to do.
That was very comprehensive. I don't think anything is left that I want to ask on this. Just one last question. Do you think, how important do you think are the academic performance, moot courts, and other kind of co-curricular activities in building a career in law firms?
I think law firms see, so when somebody comes to us, you know, as it's very important, by the way. Whenever somebody comes to us, we don't see their attitude. We say their attitude. You know, your aptitude is something that is built with time. Your aptitude, something as a lawyer, you keep on generating every day. Keep on evolving every day, improving every day. Your attitude, it matters. If you do extra co-curricular activities, your attitude is more of a team player, which is again important for me. I don't want to bring a person in my team who cannot work with other team members. Right? Your public speaking, your the way you articulate things, it comes from moot courts. The way you analyze things comes from moot courts. Are you afraid to take feedback from the judges comes from moot courts. Are you afraid to be questioned, or how are you going to answer a question, how are you going to control your aggression, how are you going to control your anger, comes from all these kind of activities, moot courts, mediation competitions, conciliation competitions, any kind of, you know, international negotiation, all these competitions. Your teamwork and how you control your emotions, how you treat your seniors, how you treat your peers, how are you as a person in a firm or in an organization, comes a lot from these co-curricular activities, which is very important. Because if I were to get a person in front of me, like one of these kids was sitting in front of me giving an interview for joining my team, you know, how I would see the rapport. I would see the, you know, how is the person talking to me, how is the person reacting to the questions I ask, how fun, light-hearted, or how serious or, you know, disciplined is the person, is what I can gauge from that first interview, will determine whether that person is okay to come to me. You know, then we will work on the aptitude together. I'm not going to expect somebody to know the Contract Labor Act from the day one.
Right.
They will know maybe basics, what they would have learned in college, or they would have seen in their internships. But when it comes to actual implementation, that will take some time, to which we all are privy of. But attitude, are you willing to learn? Are you willing to be in an atmosphere which is high stress, high pressure? Law is an atmosphere which is high stress, high pressure. There is no shortcut to that. There's no getting away from that. If you practice the field of law in whichever setting, trial lawyer, senior advocates chamber, you go to a law firm, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, boutique, anywhere, high stress, high pressure job. You are always going to be at the field. Whenever the client comes to you, the client is always going to come to you at the end moment, asking for a miracle, saying that, "Arey, kal mera date laga hua hai court mein, aap please mere saath chalo. I need to fire this gentleman, please, you get it done." They will always come to you at the end moment. And that is where we need to be okay with it. You need to be like, okay, I'm fine. I'm going to be well equipped to answer this question, and I can handle that stress. It's difficult. It comes with time, but am I okay to handle it? It's attitude, right? It's not aptitude. So it's all going to be a test of attitude.
So for the Generation Z, these patience, humility and teamwork are high virtues, to get a good career.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Suruchi. Questions are not over. Some of my students are very eager to ask their questions. So I think I can start with the first person. Anya, you had a question?
Good morning, ma'am. So my one question is like how technology like AI helps the law firms to operate.
Oh, a lot. We have adopted an AI platform. So, say for instance, I'll give you an example. At this point of time, I have got 22 matters going on. Okay, out of which I have personally 3 juniors with me. We are a large team, but as a partner, I have 3 juniors reporting to me. And all three, of course, cannot be helping me on all 22 matters. There will be some which are going to be helping me with 3 matters, 3 matters, 3 matters, 4 matters, or something like that, depending upon their capabilities, abilities, bandwidth, mental, social, and all of that. There will always be few matters which I may just have to do it on my own and take up the lead, because I'm like, I'll finish it faster. AI is helping me over there, honestly, because at SAM we've adopted this platform called Harvey. CAM has adopted another platform. Some other firms have adopted other platforms. They are helping us with drafting. They are helping us with even emails, and they are helping us with formulating our advisories as well. So my work is actually getting into half. So if I say, for instance, have to draft even a legal notice, I'm just putting in the prompts. I'm saying that this is what the situation is, and I have to draft a legal notice for a client, and this is what I want to contend. At least it's giving me that first cut, which I can then work upon and improve upon, and it's actually giving me a draft which I can probably finish it off and switch it to the client within a day, which would otherwise probably take us at least 3 to 4 days. Because and the mental work, which is to fine tune, which is to make sure the facts are appropriately addressed, which is to make sure that the argument is flowing and not in a mechanical fashion, which sometimes it can come with AI, but with a fashion which is coming from a legal perspective of a lawyer. That fine tuning I'm still doing, but at least it's given me a first cut to work with. When I'm preparing email advisories also, it gives me a format to work with. It tells me that this is the pointer that I can use, and this is the pointer that I can make sure that the advice will flow like that. Very helpful. Honestly, it has helped us a lot.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Okay, I think Muskan, she had a question.
My question is, ma'am, what are the major trends you see in upcoming 5 years in the legal industry? I'm so eager to know.
Upcoming?
5 years in the legal industry.
I can't hear you, sorry.
What are the major trends you see in the legal industry in upcoming 5 years?
5 years.
Upcoming 5 years. Oh, in legal industry.
Yes, ma'am.
AI is one thing. Reliance on AI is increasing. Laws are changing. So from a labor perspective, labor codes are going to be coming soon. But even from other perspectives, there is a lot of, if you see the Jan Vishwas bill and the Jan of 2025 and the Jan Vishwas Act of 2023, there's a lot of changes happening to the criminalization of laws. Earlier the laws were very criminalized. Everything was either a fine or imprisonment of few months or a year or both. For corporate law, sometimes it doesn't make sense, right? For laws which are criminal, it makes sense. But for laws which are not criminal and can be done away with, for that, it doesn't make it, the decriminalization is quite important. So that is happening. Then there is a lot of digitization going on of law courts, transcripts of all court proceedings, publicly available court proceedings, unless this is very confidential, which may relate to sexual crimes or sexual harassment, crimes against women or children, which are always going to remain confidential. So there's a lot of digitization happening of court procedures. I think there's a lot of digitization happening even in the way we are arguing, because now if you'll notice, if you go to courts, they're not allowing you to carry files. So there's a lot of environment sustainability also part of the digitization. They're not asking you to print papers. They're in fact telling you to use your iPads. A lot of the senior advocates also, quite elderly gentlemen or elderly ladies, are now carrying iPads. They're not carrying files. So there's a lot of stress, which leads to the next change on sustainability of the environment, and a lot of, understanding of the fact that we cannot be cutting down trees and doing everything which is not required. It can be done through, iPad, which Durga is also using for all her questions to me and, to conduct this session. So there's a lot of sustainability movement. There's a lot of understanding of the fact that we need representation from everywhere. Today who's our Chief Justice of India? Justice Gavai, who's a Dalit Chief Justice, right? So tomorrow, after 2 years, probably by 2017, we're going to get our first women Chief Justice, Justice Nagaratna, right? So there's a lot of stress. The fifth thing which I can see happening is a lot of stress on equitable representation in the legal fraternity, right? So because a lot of women judges are being, a lot of people are being given preference who are women or people with disabilities or transgender persons appearing. Have you seen the fact that there are a lot of now transgender lawyers, enrolled with the bar councils? Kerala, Karnataka, a lot of these bar councils are now enrolling transgender lawyers. A lot of disability lawyers are also there. There are a lot of women judges which are being given promotions and are coming up to the level of additional judges. It's all representation. So equitability is coming up in the representation. I am actually looking forward to Justice Nagaratna coming on the bench, even if for 1 month.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
I think Nanda, you had a question?
Ma'am, we have heard a lot that getting into tier 1 firms is very difficult, and it's not easy to approach them on even get internships. So how was your experience there, and how did you what are some tips so that the law students can approach get internships, get jobs at the tier 1 firms?
I actually, I knew from a long time, I was already working in it, but I was not specializing in it. I knew from a long time I'm going to do labor and employment laws. How I got all these, interviews, I failed in a lot of interviews as well, with a lot of tier 1 law firms, but how I got these calls were directly reaching out to the partners. Their email IDs are always available online, and I used to reach out directly to the partners saying that I want to practice in this field and I understand that you are a partner in so-and-so law firm and I would like to work with you, Honestly speaking, that is how it got me an interview in my first job in Amarchand, when it was Undivided Amarchand, Mangaldas and Suresh Shroff. There is where I reached out to, the partner over there, and today I am getting mails as well from people who want to intern in labor, and I'm not kidding, I always forward it to the HR, because if a person is willing and actually has showed interest in joining a field like this, which actually tells me that they are aware of what they want to do and how they want to do and where they want to go, I see focus. So a lot of tier 1 law firms see focus. A lot of because the thing is, tier 1 law firms are very compartmentalized. There's a department for banking and finance, there's a department for project finance and infrastructure, there's a department for income tax laws, basically the tax laws, there's a department for labor laws, there's a department for intellectual property. So tier 1 is very divided. Now every department will have couple of partners working in it with a lot of bunch of associates. Now if I am getting an email, I know that the person is focused in joining my team. I know that the person is focused in joining my vertical area. So why won't I look at their CV, right? Corporate partners are separate. A corporate partner receiving a CV of a person wanting to join them or wanting to come there for an internship is going to get a CV separate. So tier 1 is very compartmentalized. Always remember that. So whenever you're approaching a partner, first of all, don't send mass emails, because I can see a lot of people are sending today mass emails. They're sending me emails for corporate internships. I'm not a corporate lawyer, I'm a labor lawyer. So when you go and apply to people, make sure you have done your research on the person. Everybody is available on LinkedIn, everybody's profile is available online. So if you want to, say for instance, focus on banking laws, go online, see if you want to work in a CAM or a SAM, who are the partners in CAM or a SAM actually doing banking law. Read up on them. Do they align with your focus as well? Apply to them. 100% you will get an answer for them. 100%. I always answer people who apply to me because I can see the focus in coming for this practice area, which is a very niche practice area. Not a lot of people want to do labor laws because they feel that it's a very closed, practice area. A lot of people want to do corporate laws, banking laws, Harvey Specters of the world. So they think that, they want to do that. But if you're focused, you will read up on the person. See, when you join an organization, you don't just join the organization, you join your boss. And when you leave an organization, you don't leave the organization, you leave your boss. right? So you always have to make sure that you see who you're joining, apply to them with that focus as to why you want to work with them, get a response, 100% guaranteed.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Okay, I think yeah, we can wrap up with one last question that was asked by Angel.
Hello, ma'am.
Hi.
My question is that beyond the academic excellence, what are the skills that a law student should focus on?
Moot courts, mediation competitions, arbitration. See, another trend which is coming up is alternate dispute resolution, which is getting a lot of focus. Nobody wants to go to courts so much anymore. Okay, so I think public speaking is coming through these competitions. So you, as a lawyer, as a side thing, always do public speaking as much as you can. It will get your dictum high, it will get your enunciation ability high, it will get your thought process high, and it will give you that confidence to come in front. You know, I mean, even if say 5 to 10 years down the line you decide to go independent, you will only be able to go independent if you can argue in front of the judges on your own and not as a shadow, standing behind somebody senior or somebody who you feel is maybe a better orator. You have to have those oratory skills. So I always stress upon the fact that it's not just about reading the law. It's about, imbibing the fact that tomorrow you are a lawyer representing your own client on your own. Okay, whenever your junior is also working with me, I don't tell them to be in my shadow. I'm like, what do you think? I will put them in the spot. Sometimes I may come across as tough or strict or very rude, but I will tell them that, boss, you're a lawyer. We are working together in the field. I'm not your boss over here. I can also tell you to take the call on your own if I don't have the time perhaps, or if I feel that it is okay, I don't need to get involved in it, I will tell you to take the call. Where you will have to have that confidence, and how these confidence comes only when you practice it, right? So apart from your lectures, you also have to do a lot of other activities which will help you be confident. And then you are an individual who can go out there and say that, okay, with confidence, that yeah, I am ready to do it if you tell me tomorrow also. A lot of senior lawyers, how they train their juniors, they tell them go get a adjournment starting with that. Then they tell them go argue the case a bit because it's anyways going to be a short case. That is how it's done in a lot of our profession. We are thrown into the deep end. We are always thrown into the deep end, and the lawyers learn like that only. They all learn to swim very on their own. There's nobody helping you with that. So develop your confidence, appear for competitions, moot courts, mediation, arbitrations, read up on everything, and learn how to maintain and compose and be with confidence with yourself.
Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you so much, Suruchi, for sharing some very fine perspectives on the diversity and inclusion, and also on the development of legal career for the students. Thank you so much for taking out your valuable time. Of course, you have a very busy schedule. We are aware of that. It was nice talking to you.
Nice being over here. and
Yes,
talking to
thank you so
everyone.
much. I hope we can keep in touch
Absolutely.
in the future also. Thank you so much for watching us in DME Prime Hours with Legal Sharks. Wait for the next episode of DME Prime Hours with Legal Sharks. Again, keep tuning. Thank you so much.